first panel on clean energy transition and investing. He is the CEO and chairman of Stirling Infrastructure's investment board, an advisor to a diverse set of project sponsors, listed companies, asset managers, and government entities on mergers and acquisitions transactions. He has raised capital for large and complex infrastructure and energy projects internationally and leads a team of experts covering infrastructure, energy, and advanced technologies. Michael, I hand it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate amongst this illustrious group of investors, stakeholders, and government officials who are expressing an interest in this green acceleration program. Well, what I wanted to do before I introduce my panel is just set out some of my thoughts from a macroeconomic perspective. The key factors that occupy the minds of many of these stakeholders who are investing into the energy value chain today are issues around geopolitics, which we'll need to discuss, and we can't be unaware of what's going on globally. The second aspect is high inflation, and inflation is partly caused by the increasing cost of energy. And indeed, if we are going to move towards a greener environment, green energy is going to cost. You can't get green energy at the same cost as hydrocarbons historically. And part of the challenge major corporations have, and governments, is to reconcile the arbitrage or the challenge between companies and their populations and the cost differential that the public cannot necessarily fulfill. So we have a cost of living crisis, which you're all well aware of and is well documented. The second aspect is you've got corporations that are making excess profits within the energy sector. And indeed, part of the argument for these companies not being given a windfall tax is that last year or the year before, gas prices were at an all-time low, and there's been a lot of volatility. And to look after their interests, governments have, in some markets or geographies, have decided to hold back that taxation that perhaps would otherwise would have fallen due on them. Now, within that eco-environment, in addition to that, you have major global corporations that are sitting on the board trying to figure out how do we move to a green transition. And this is a huge challenge for them. Why and how can they become motivated to move to a green environment when they're sustaining high profits, selling hydrocarbons? Now, hydrocarbons is a highly profitable business, whereas green energy investments tend to be a fixed income return. So if you're selling power, you tend to do it on a PPA for a long-term contract. You have the quality of the credit, and you want to have security of investment before the banks will lend. So a lot of these boards are struggling to figure out where the next move should be and how they should go about it. Yes, there is leadership, and yes, some companies are seeking to transition. But the bedrock of their revenues is hydrocarbons, and it's likely to remain like that for the foreseeable future. This is where people like you who are in this room and the green accelerators who are going to innovate are going to try and disrupt and create opportunity for large corporations to adopt. And the political thinking around moving towards green is quite wide, in all honesty, and we've done a lot of analysis on this. No doubt many of you in the room are experts. But there are geographies, particularly Europe, that are ahead of the curve. I had a meeting with an emerging market economy with one of their ministers in Davos, and over lunch, and he said to me, we've discovered we have coal, and we haven't actually started utilizing it, and this is the time for us to do it. Now, the other issue from a macro-political perspective is that low-income countries cannot afford green energy in their mix. They certainly can't afford hydrogen, because hydrogen is so expensive to produce relatively. So there is a responsibility partially on subsidies, I would say from a UN perspective or the IFC, some kind of framework, some kind of income going back to some of these countries to be subsidized to encourage them to move green. But what is ironic is if you look at Southeast Asia, which are dependent more greatly perhaps on hydrocarbons as their economy grows, the saddest part of it is that people are putting on their air conditioning, trying to cool down, and actually what they're doing is polluting their own environment, encouraging floods, famine, and all the elements that come together. Now that is absolutely petrifying. And another point that I would say that you need to think about is people that say, not in my backyard. This is not our problem. This is their problem. And they haven't invested in their own people, and there is corruption in their economy, and we're not going to support them. That's their problem. Absolutely wrong. You are going to see mass migration moving north, because people won't be able to eat, they won't be able to drink. So it is a collective responsibility that we all have. Moreover, I was in Parliament, in the UK Parliament, a while back, listening to some discussions on a committee, and there was a Chinese representative also providing commentary, which I thought was very insightful. And everyone was saying that China is irresponsible, they're one of the world's biggest polluters. But his comeback was absolutely on point, in my view. And I'm not politically motivated, I just look at things objectively. He said that you guys want washing machines, you guys want cars, you want engines, you want all these things. Where are all these products going to the rest of the world? But yet you want it at the lowest price. So we're doing it through hydrocarbons because that gives us the lowest price. So we are collectively responsible. It is not a one-way street. We all need to take responsibility. Furthermore, when a major oil and gas company disposes of a coal asset or a hydrocarbon asset, and they publish in their annual accounts that we've disposed of it and we're green, that is a fallacy. Because what they've actually probably done is sold it to another private equity firm that doesn't have the same values, doesn't have the same stakeholders, and someone else is producing the power and isn't as accountable as that other organisation was. So these are theories or points that you need to reflect on. Other aspects that we should also think about is the growth of the transition through LNG, and issues around LNG and the importance of LNG are paramount. What I find fascinating, again, when we're in economic disruption or recession, the issues around the economy and actually being green become less important, generally within democratic systems that I've seen. The reason for that is, of course, because people need to survive first. One thing that we would sadly, I think, progressively have to accept, and there is something to counter it, is a lower standing of living for most people. I cannot see that the standard of living and travel and the lifestyles that we enjoy at this point in time being as they have been over the last 30 years. I think we are going to go and find a period in which we'll go into a period of regression, but yet it will be temporary. But temporary could be 30 years in this world when I'm speaking, because technology will come back and there will be efficiencies and opportunities, and the cost of energy will readjust itself over time. But in the short term, be prepared for higher prices for electricity. Moreover, wind, solar are showing great potential. Another thought, food for thought, we're very much involved in the EV value chain. We're working with some of the world's largest energy companies, asset managers and government institutions on rolling out EVs. So I will pause at this point and invite my panelists, give them a round of applause. Okay, what I'm going to do now is give our panelists an opportunity just to introduce themselves, their organisations, and then what we're interested in more of, rather than the theory, is actually what they're doing to help net zero. So it's my sincere pleasure. Please, if you could introduce yourself and your organisation. having me too. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Barbara Ann Bernard. I run an asset management company called Wincrest Capital. I launched an energy transition fund during the pandemic, which is my version of ESG 2.0. And I believe ESG 2.0 is about authenticity and materiality, and that's the portfolio that sits at the intersection of profit and purpose. And in the process of decarbonizing mines, I learned a lot about carbon credits. And I want to thank Michael for that wonderful introduction, because he gave us all so much food for thought. I think carbon credits are something that people like to poo-poo and say, oh, we need to reduce, and that's just, a nice excuse on the way. I don't believe emerging or developing markets need subsidies. I believe in climate capitalism. And I have this very strong view that carbon can be the currency that funds the energy transition. And this is something I've spent a great deal of time thinking about, and maybe we can get into it later, but I don't want to hog the floor here.
Thank you. My name is Gerry from Sluys. I'm the CEO of Business Creation. We are a business redevelopment company, which means that we acquire business activities, non-core business activities from large corporations, and redevelop them into new activities, mainly in the renewable energy sphere and sustainability sphere. In that context, I was also the founder and CEO of EWT, a wind turbine company, and of some solar development companies. As far as it concerns us, as we observe it, the time for talking and listening, it was just said, is over. I subscribe to all the things that you two have said already before, but we need now to get to accelerated action. So in that context, the term accelerator has a double meaning here. It is not sufficient what is happening now. We are going through a multiple crisis currently, a climate crisis, environmental crisis if you want, a financial crisis, a logistics crisis. They all have to do with that, with each other, and we have to address it. And therefore, we now need to accelerate any of the programs that have been defined by the United Nations or by the EU, like the REPower program. They are too slow. Why are they too slow? Because generally all these plans and all these so-called actions are actually defined by politicians and CEOs of large corporations who meet here in Davos, for example. They only represent 20% of the world economy. The remaining 80% is represented by small and medium enterprises. They have no place here in Davos, or communities for that matter. The real solution for the speeding up of the transition, the energy transition to renewables, is that we indeed do all these things that have been decided, like the REPower program, as I said, or the four North Sea countries have done to build 65 gigawatts of capacity in the North Sea. We have to do that in terms of wind power, offshore wind power, but at the same time we have now to start building or accelerating community parks, wind parks, community and distributed energy business. And what is necessary for this is, of course, a financial model that supports that, and innovation, and I guess that we will talk about the innovation part quite a lot today.
If you could hand over, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dayton, and I'm the Director of Capital Partnerships at LG Nova. And LG Nova is the North American kind of innovation arm of LG Electronics. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with LG as it relates to your computers, monitors, screens, appliances. And but what you might not know, which actually I didn't know until I started at LG, is that they actually produce a lot of electrical components that are relevant to climate and to this conversation around the Green Accelerator. So over around 50% of all components in electric cars are produced by LG under various brands. We have a ton of EV infrastructure, batteries. The space is very competitive. We're very competitive in the space. So it's something that is a big interest to the company, to our center, and we have one of the most robust commitments actually in the world, especially for a large manufacturing company, of a net zero commitment until 2030. And some of the innovations that we're doing at LG Nova with our grand challenges and with some of our capital partnerships are about figuring out the best way to accelerate and scale, in particular startups, to achieve that 2030 objective. So I think we, we're not always the one that's most thought of, I think, in the EV and climate space, but I think in terms of real possibilities, it's don't overlook the larger companies, because I think if you can make progress in those spaces, there's a lot of potential there. So excited to be here.
So that was incredibly exciting. So we don't want to have a boring discussion. We want to have some controversy here. We want a bit of excitement. So tell me why they don't need subsidies, Barbara. What is the gossip? What are they saying in the Energy OK magazine?
So I love that we're on the panel with LG and there's some big corporates in the room. You're right, carbon's very valuable because 60%, 61% of the world's countries and 20% by sales of the largest companies in the world have net zero targets. Rather than going one little project at a time, I think that if these companies use their offsets to help developing countries fund their energy transitions, we don't need the subsidies. And I'll give you an example of this. I also run a hedge fund, and we were, during the pandemic, don't quote me, we were short Royal Caribbean. So I was going through their annual report, and I saw this line item for a wind farm in Kansas. So I followed that yellow brick road, and I said, what is a cruise ship doing with a wind farm in Kansas? What they had done was they had given a purchasing power agreement for every megawatt that wind farm produced for the next 12 years, or 25 years. That would be worth $12.8 million in carbon credits to them, and it offset 10% of their footprint. I'm from a developing country. We spend $1 billion in bunker fuel every year. We have $10 billion in debt, an 86% debt to GDP ratio, and a balance of payments crisis. So when the government asked for more ideas, I said, until we have our energy independence, we're never going to solve our balance of payments crisis. I happen to be from a country that cruise ship sails through. And I said, had that project been done in our country, it would have been 45% of our installed capacity. So I think these larger firms, rather than going one little mangrove project at a time, can use their scale to come together to solve the energy transition. In our country, we burn bunker fuel at 37 cents a kilowatt hour.
Which country?
The Bahamas. Solar is 7 cents. So we could bring down the cost of energy by 75%. What's the problem? We can't afford the panel. So then I said, hang on, let's issue carbon credits so we can fund this transition. The problem is the project developers take 20 to 50% commission. That doesn't work for me anyway. I want to raise as much money for countries. So I've also built a carbon credit exchange that doesn't take extortionate commission and actually cuts the country and it helps. So this is a rather big idea, but it's 100% possible. And when carbon is traded at scale, when it's digitized and it settles globally 24/7, we have a currency. And then I can apply all the principles of corporate finance I spent my life learning to funding an energy transition. So I'm interested in talking to any big buyer of carbon credits because I have gigatons of capacity. And this to me is the intersection of climate and capital, and super interesting because these are the sustainable solutions.
Maria, you're a prospective buyer. What's your view on carbon credits? Is that something you've thought about? And how integrated can this really be? Is it just disaggregated and there's lots of little markets? How do we create a fully integrated global carbon credits mechanism?
Wow, that's four very challenging questions in one. I'm definitely not tasked by LG to answer that question. And if I did, I'm sure I would get in trouble. But what I can say is that in terms of what our center does, as it relates to carbon, is we do try to accelerate and build new business lines around new ideas and startups that are working in that space. So in that sense, that's those are the areas, around carbon that we focus on. And I think and in particular, my job is to rally the capital, the various types of capital, whether from within LG or outside, to help scale those.
What's the most exciting opportunities you're doing at LG at the moment? What gets your heart beating late at night?
Yeah, no, I mean, the EV space is so hot for us. I mean, we launched, we have this network, this loose network of funders called the Capital Alliance, the LG Capital Alliance, and we have some of our funders are in the room, which is great. So, but yeah, so in the last 4 months, we've done almost $500 million in investment through our top 50. From our, we had a grand challenge last year. We brought in 1,300 startups, and then we kind of culled them down through a selection process to a top 50, and we've had just massive number of acquisitions and capital flowing. We've had 4 acquisitions in the last 3 months, and that's one thing that kind of provoked us starting our own venture fund, and LG agreeing to anchor a certain percentage. So yeah, I think EV is the most exciting place for us.
And Gerry, what are you investing in at the moment? Are you just European focused, or you're more global? What's your vision on opportunities?
Currently more European indeed, and we're not buying carbon credits because actually I'm sorry to say, there's a sort of connotation with the indulgences from the Middle Ages that we sell. Now we try to achieve carbon-free production generation of energy, and funding of that actually is strange enough, because actually that's what you said already. Many people have shown that renewable energy needs subsidies, but that's not true. If it is properly planned, properly manufactured as a product, and properly built up as a distribution system, it is a profitable business. So that is first of all. So we are focusing on that. We are focusing on hydrogen applications currently. But most of all, we are working, as I said before, on distributed energy, wind systems, mainly of smaller wind systems that are co-owned by communities, so that we also have this problem, or this issue of co-propriety of communities that actually avoids a lot of the protest actions that normally take place. And by doing that, we can shorten the administrative and the connection cycles quite a lot. So that's what we're dealing with.
That's helpful. So I'd like to do a quick Q&A before we wrap up this session. Does anyone want to ask a question? Don't be shy now. Yes, we have 2 questions. We'll take you and you next, please. Please go ahead, sir. If you'd stand up and introduce yourself, don't be shy. It's like the Ricky Lake show.
I think it would be good when you get a microphone so that we all can hear your question.
Great. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Pino. I will be presenting our company afterwards. I was just having a question regarding the carbon credits. They're kind of compensating something that's being polluted, but it's not bringing kind of capital into innovation and so on. And we've heard from Mari before, parts of it is installation we should do now, as quickly as possible, install wind, install solar, but the gap needs to be closed. And all these carbon credit systems, it's a huge market. It's not flowing to the companies that are closing these gaps.
I think it's an interesting comment, but the more demand for the product, the more technology will be driven to it, right? So I'm just saying it's an innovative and new currency that can help fund some of the information, installation, and innovation that people like you are working on. So I think it's all hopeful.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope it's at the speed we need it.
Thank you. Next question, please. If there's any other questions, please put your hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm Thorsten, I'm founder of Africa Green Tech. My question goes to you. Is the American market now open to invest in African projects, or because the Trump area really destroyed a lot of, I think, understanding in Africa, and are the American investors now again open to come to Africa? That's my question.
It's a great question. So basically we're talking about the voluntary market because in the US, right, you have the California and the RGGI, which are not open to African projects, and Quebec falls under that too. And I've tried to sell them an African project and it's just not within the remit. But on the voluntary basis, I don't see why not. You know, I'm from North America, I'm an investor, and I'm open to backing African projects and working with a number of projects and countries there. So hopefully, yes.
I would also speak in terms of our Grand Challenge and our capital networks at LG, like definitely interested in innovations coming out of Africa and have several African startups within our greater ecosystem and are very interested in that space because of the leapfrogging capabilities I'm sure you're aware of. So I think any funder that's interested in real innovation and especially something that's kind of beyond the status quo, it means looking at Africa. If they're not, they're stupid. So.
Last question. Anyone else? Yes, we have a question in the far back. Thank you.
Olga Hamama, Planet FC. I have one question with regards to the contribution of the public sector. You mentioned hydrogen energy. To which extent is cooperation with public sector necessary? Because we're also talking about building infrastructures. And in your view, is this cooperation going well? If not, what shall we do to accelerate that process?
Well, what I can start to take that question, and I'll hand it on to Gerry because he's involved in hydrogen as well. So we've done some advanced research in this area, and we're actually speaking to some of the world's biggest producers of hydrogen. And the biggest challenge that you have is that the starting point is the production. So the production is relatively straightforward. It's not cost efficient. Then it's the distribution of getting it down the cycle to the end user. And that's where it becomes a little bit more complicated because that infrastructure has to be built, and that's right from the storage tankers, which with some technologies you can actually use the existing gas pipelines, but equally it's the cost of building that infrastructure and it being profitable. So government has to take some element of risk, as it did with wind power 15 years ago. Wind was considered to be a high risk investment, whereas today it's bread and butter. So I expect it will be the same thing with hydrogen, and there's certainly a role for government to support, to enable that. Gerry, your thoughts?
Yes, so first of all, what worries me about hydrogen, where we stand today, is that most of the production of hydrogen is carbon-based. So we will need, as it looks now, quite some time to change that. The governments should play a vital role in supporting this. I mean, I'm sitting here in a panel where not everybody is so convinced, as I understand it, of governmental interference or support, but it's the only way that we can do this, like EU countries in Europe are already doing. The state has a major task in this. Also in creating awareness of the problem. I compare this, for instance, with the USA. In a recent survey that was done by the American Wind Association, it turned out that 65% of the US population, I don't know how representative this poll was, frankly speaking, does not believe that there should be a program for renewable energy, because they believe that they have current carbon resources enough in the form of shale gas, etc. Now, this is partly also the case in Europe, and governments also have a major task in creating the awareness. So both creating awareness, subsidizing, or for that matter, which is a very good old European model of cooperation, the public-private partnership. I'm part of some of these programs, and it is really helpful if governments realize that they should support and not de-accelerate. And fortunately, there are some countries in Europe who are doing that.
Okay, I think this whole program is about the acceleration rather than us. So I'm going to wrap it up there and move on to the next panel. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.